Friends, we are back in our week 2 series of Exiled. Last week, we talked about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and the importance of community and how there is nothing that can separate us from the love of God. This week, we are talking about Daniel. I feel like I say this a lot about people in the Bible, but I really like Daniel. And one of the things that I really like about Daniel is that he seems pretty confident in who he is. He doesn't give in to peer pressure. He is fully and completely him, and I love that. Daniel, like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, was exiled from his home country to Babylon. The king that was ruling at the time of this story, though, was King Darius. Now, everyone loved Daniel, except a couple of people who didn't like how much attention Daniel was getting, and they wanted him gone. Yikes. These Old Testament stories are wild. So, they convinced King Darius to sign an official statement that said any person who prays to anyone that isn't the king will be thrown into the lion's den. Well, Daniel, being a follower of God, and someone who didn't give in to the pressure of others easily, didn't care. The book of Daniel, chapter 6, says this: Now when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened toward Jerusalem. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. I love this about Daniel, because not giving into peer pressure is something that I think is so hard, because I always wanted to fit in and be just like everyone else. So what is peer pressure? Peer pressure is when we give into what other people want us to do, even if it isn't something we want to do. Daniel experienced peer pressure, people wanting him to pray to the king instead of God. Everybody else was doing it, but Daniel refused and kept doing what he knew was right, even if it was different than what other people were doing. We also see this same theme in the New Testament. In Romans it says, "Don't be conformed to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your minds so that you can figure out what God's will is, what is good and pleasing and mature." That means that we don't give in to what everyone else is doing. Listen to God and try to do what God wants you to do. When we do that, we get to live our best and fullest life. The Bible tells us that God wants us to live a full and abundant life. And from personal experience, life is better when we feel like we don't have to give in to peer pressure. So, to finish the story, Daniel gets thrown in the lion's den, and the king is pretty upset because he loved Daniel. But the law is the law. So first thing in the morning, he runs to the lion's den and finds Daniel still alive. Sometimes it can be easier to give in to what everyone else is doing. But the easy thing isn't always the right thing. Now, I don't recommend testing that out in a den of lions. But when we choose to avoid negative peer pressure and try to follow the path that God wants for us, our lives are better. Daniel teaches us that we don't have to give in to peer pressure.